All right, this is lesson 1.5, and so it's the last lesson of chapter 1, and it's called Using the Definitions of the Trig Functions. This is going to come in 5 parts, and I think we can fit this in 2 or 3 videos, but 5 parts of this. So if you look through your notes, you'll see those 5 different parts, and it's kind of a nice summary of section 4. We got the definitions of the trig functions, and now we put it all together. And so you can use these definitions and get some neat facts out of it. So our first fact here is going to be nice and straightforward. And oops, you know what? This is the first video I've actually made. The first 3 lessons I made before you guys were even in class. I met you guys. And so this is the first video I've made where I actually know who I'm talking to. And we've been kind of a tradition. We've been starting with a joke. And so I'll just tell you one joke here real quick, and then we will get going. All right. This was from Tuesday, May 8th. A woman called her husband at work. "Sorry, dear," he said. "I'm very busy, so I don't have time to talk." "Oh, this won't take long," the wife said. "I just have some good news and some bad news." "Look," the husband repeated, "I'm busy. Just give me the good news." "Well," she said, "the airbag works." I'm pausing for laughter. All right, so now we will get started. So we have 5 different facts here. Our first fact is going to be about the reciprocals. And if you look back at section 4, we said sine and cosecant are reciprocals, cosine and secant are reciprocals, tangent and cotangent are reciprocals. And there's several ways you can write it. One way is this. Sine is 1 over cosecant. You could also say cosecant is 1 over sine. Or the other way to state that, when you have reciprocals, if you multiply 2 reciprocals, you take the cosecant times the sine, you get 1. Because you multiply reciprocals, you get 1. 1/5 and 5 are reciprocals. Multiply those. 1/5 times 5, you get 1. So I've stated it here one way, but just know when it's stated here one way, cosine and secant are reciprocals, tangent and cotangent are reciprocals, that there's really 2 other ways you could have stated that as well. All right, how will that be used? Well, look right here. We've got the cosecant of some angle equals 2. Could you tell me what the sine is? Sure you can. The sine is the reciprocal. Cosecant and sine are reciprocals. So the cosecant is 2. Just as simple. The sine is the reciprocal. 1/2. Tangent is negative 11 over square root of 5. That's the tangent. So what's the cotangent? It's going to be the reciprocal. And there's a negative. So the negative stays. We get 5 over square root of 11. You probably remember you can't leave square roots on the bottom of a fraction. So we take the top and bottom by square root of 11. And it looks like I've got negative 5 square root of 11 all over 11 for my reciprocal. And here I've got 9.8 for the cosine. We're going to find out later that's not even possible. But let's just work with it right now. If the cosine would have been 9.8, what's the secant of theta? It's the reciprocal, 1 over 9.8, and technically we shouldn't really leave it like that, but we're going to let it slide because we're just practicing these facts today. Secant, cosine are reciprocals. All right, that's our first fact. Quick and easy. Unfortunately, not all this quick and not all this easy. All right, here comes our second fact. It's going to be very good for you to know the signs, the plus or minus signs, that is, of the trig functions. So if I said, you're in the 3rd quadrant, it'd be really nice if you could tell me, oh, in the 3rd quadrant, the tangent is positive, and the sine is negative, and the cosine is negative. If you could just know these things off the top of your head. So I want to take a couple minutes to explain how you can figure these things out, and then I want to give you an acronym that will work to tell you whether the trig functions, where they're positive, to tell you whether the trig functions are positive, and then by default, where they're not positive, the other quadrants are negative. Okay, we have our coordinate axes here. You can kind of see our x-axis, we've got our y-axis. And you guys remember the quadrants. This is one of our questions on the homework dealing with quadrants. We had the first quadrant, those counterclockwise, the second quadrant. Here's the third, here's the fourth. And come back to the first quadrant. We know in the first quadrant both the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate are positive. Over in the second quadrant, we had to go left. The x-coordinate's negative, but we went up. So the y-coordinate's positive. Third quadrant, we went left and down. Both the x and y are negative. In the fourth quadrant, the x is positive, but the y is negative. Okay, we come back to our definitions of the trig functions. That was section 4. Remember, we also had an r in there occasionally, and we said this in section 4, but it's worth repeating. R is always positive. Okay, so that if you look here, it's like, well, wait, what about r? Don't worry about r. It's always positive. Okay, let's think through this for, I don't know, let's start with the sine. And the definition of sine, the sine of theta, it's y over r. All right, so let's take a look through this and see if we can figure out what the plus or minus signs are going to be. We look here in the first quadrant, we're looking at the y coordinate. Oh, it's positive. We've got a positive. R is always positive, positive by a positive. In the first quadrant, look at that. The sign is positive. Since sine and cosecant are reciprocals, they're going to have the same sign. The plus or minus signs will be the same. And so the cosecant, again, because it's reciprocal, that's also positive. Second quadrant, look at that. Y coordinate's positive. Sure enough, sine is positive. Third and fourth quadrants, look at that. The y coordinate's negative. The y coordinate's negative. And so in the third and fourth quadrants, the sign is negative. Because again, we're not worried about r. R is kind of irrelevant here. It's always positive. We're worried about sign, kind of worried about the y coordinate. Okay, we could do the same thing for cosine, and you can kind of think through that one on your own. I'm not going to do that whole problem. But cosine is x over r, and now you're looking at the x coordinates. It goes positive, negative, negative, positive. And then maybe slightly more interesting is the tangent. The tangent is, remember what that is? It's y over x. If you don't remember what it is, you'll want to kind of think through that and memorize that. It's an important fact to memorize. Tangent is y over x. So if you look here, x and y are both positive. So in the first quadrant, tangent's positive. Second quadrant, we've got a positive y, a negative x, and a positive divided by a negative is a negative. So second quadrant, we've got a negative. Third quadrant, very interesting. A negative divided by a negative gives us a positive. So the third quadrant, we're back to positive. And the fourth quadrant, we are back to negative, because look at this. We've got a negative divided by a positive. All right. So logically, hopefully that makes really good sense. You say, oh yeah, I could figure these out. You know, sine, I'm looking at the y coordinate, cosine the x coordinate. Tangent, we're looking at the quotient of y and x. There's another way to do this that I'll suggest, because now that we've figured it out whatever we figured out logically, there's a quick, easy way to remember it. And it goes like this. It goes a smart trig class. And we will probably say this semester at least 100 times. We'll say, oh, remember a smart trig class? And what it is, it's an acronym. It helps you remember which trig functions are positive. So A is in the first quadrant. A stands for all. I'm just going to erase over here a little bit. Get that guy too. And look at this. In the first quadrant, all your trig functions are positive. Second quadrant, S stands for sine. In the second quadrant, look at this. Sine, and it's reciprocal to the cosecant. We don't worry about the cosecants because they go with the other functions, but the sine is positive. And then by default, the other trig functions are negative. Then we come along here, T, you've probably guessed it, stands for tangent. So in the third quadrant, look at that, the tangent's positive. A smart trig class, the C stands for the cosine. In the fourth quadrant, the cosine is positive. So a smart trig class tells you which trig functions are positive. I'm just going to write that out because occasionally people forget what it tells you. A smart trig class. That's going to tell you which functions are positive. And then you will, by default, whatever ones are not mentioned, those must be the negative ones. All right, let's try this a little bit. So questions I could ask. Where is the sine positive and at the same time the cosine negative? Well, sine positive, so greater than 0 is positive. All right, I'm going through a smart trig class. A smart, let me write it like this, I'm sorry. Here's my quadrants. A smart trig class. So they're all positive in the first. Sine is positive in the second, so I know sine is positive in the first and the second. That's for sine. Okay, cosine less than 0 is negative. So cosine negative, let's think about this a little bit. A Smart Trig class tells me where things are positive. So cosine is positive all in here. That's where it's positive. So where's the cosine negative? Right there in the second and the third. So there's the second, there's the third. This is joined with an and. So where's the sine positive and the cosine negative? I see one spot that they have in common. Look, it's right there in the second quadrant. All right, let's try it again. I'm just going to write down my A Smart Trig class. That seems to be a useful thing. A Smart Trig class. Where's the cosine positive? They're all positive here. Cosine is positive here. So the first and the fourth. Where's the tangent positive? They're all positive in the first. The tangent is positive in the third. So what do they have in common? They've got the first quadrant in common. And down here, tangent negative. Let's just do A Smart Trig class. That's telling us where they're positive. They're all positive in the first. Tangent is positive in the third. So where's the tangent negative? In the second. That's a little sloppy. Second and the fourth. And the cotangent is reciprocal, so it's going to be exactly the same. So we've got the second and the fourth is where that is, where those functions are negative. All right, let's take so we can sneak in one more page here. It's the same thing. Really, we'll just think through this a little bit. Give the signs, the plus or minus signs of the 6 trig functions. So let's think about this. Our coordinate system, here would be 0 degrees. Up here is 90. Over here is 180. Here's 270. If you made a complete revolution, then we know 0 and 360 are the same thing. So if you rotated 74 degrees, you'd be right up here in the first quadrant. So let's think through A Smart Trig class. First quadrant is A. All trig functions are positive in the first quadrant. Done. Next one, 129 degrees. 129 degrees would take us a little past 90. We are now in the second quadrant. A Smart. So what is positive? The sine and the cosecant. Everything else is negative. Cosine, secant, tangent, cotangent. All right, you probably got the idea. I'll talk through these other two, but you can maybe just fast forward and check these as well. 298 degrees. We rotate around a little more than 270. Puts us in the fourth quadrant. A Smart Trig class. Fourth quadrant. Positive is the cosine. Secant, negative are the rest. Sine, cosecant, tangent, cotangent. And then the last one, negative 19 degrees. How do you do a negative 19? You back up the other way. So negative 19 also puts you in the fourth quadrant. So it's the same as answer number 3. So let's write that. Same as number 3. All right. That's 2 of our 5 facts. This is a good spot to stop the first video.